Well, if you look at the Yanomami, and particularly you look at my family, they don't suffer from cancer, diabetes, obesity, Crohn's disease, asthma, allergies. I mean, you just name it. And these are the types of diseases that are associated largely with inflammation, right? And they have one of the most diverse gut microbiomes, and I decided to embark on a sort of personal journey, a personal quest to go back to the Amazon rainforest and to find and reunite with my mom. And didn't know she was alive or where she was. It's really cool. You never know what you're going to eat that day. You just don't know.
Yeah.
It could be
Yeah.
it could be an armadillo. It could be an anaconda. One is well the most prevalent and most pressing I think are the gold miners that are coming in there. Gold miners because that's a direct outright violent conflict. They
Yeah.
come with machine guns. The Yanomami have bows and arrows, and they are, absolutely destroying the swaths of the Amazon rainforest to the point where it just can't come back. And they're poisoning the rivers with water, with mercury. Riverways with mercury, and bringing disease.
Hey everyone, Rupesh Patel here, host of the Two Nobodies podcast. I'm so excited to share this conversation that I just had with David Good, who's a microbiome researcher. We focus on the Yanomami Peoples. The Yanomami Peoples are an indigenous group located deep in the Amazon rainforest. They're isolated and they're nomadic, and they've been researched by academics for years and years. But very rarely do you find that these academics have a connection to the Yanomami Peoples and are invested in them. David Good is that exception. David's mom is Yanomami, his dad is American, and so he has this personal, heartfelt connection and story with the Yanomami peoples, with his mom, that gets shared in this episode. We talk about the Yanomami people's way of life, their diet, what their microbiome is actually looking like, what it's like living in the Amazon, what are the threats to the Amazon rainforest and its impact on the Yanomami peoples. So if you're someone who's interested in the microbiome, if you're interested in indigenous cultures like the Yanomami peoples, if you're interested in the Amazon rainforest in particular, this is absolutely the episode for you. It was such a fun conversation. It flew by. So like and subscribe. I can't wait to hear all those comments and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Two Nobodies podcast with my dad.
David, good to see you. Really happy to have you on the show. This is an episode I've been thinking about for a while, ever since Dr. Emma Allen-Vercoe first mentioned you. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. Welcome to Two Nobodies. Appreciate having you today.
Thank you so much. It's really great being here. Looking forward to a pretty awesome conversation.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. So for listeners, if folks listen to the episode with Dr. Emma Allen-Vercoe, who's a really renowned microbiome researcher, she spoke about David and his story, and just collecting microbes from poop from the Yanomami tribe, and it was just a really interesting story. And so you've been on my radar for a while, and I'm just so thankful to have you. And I want to talk about your roots, the Yanomami tribe, your research in particular, how the Yanomami tribe lives, threats to them currently, and your foundation, which is incredible work. So there's a lot of things to talk about. But first of all, Dr. Emma Allen-Vercoe, what a lovely person, hey?
I feel so lucky to have her as my advisor. She has really given me this unique and opportunity to not only study the world of the microbiome, but to help uncover who the Yanomami people are from the context of their microbiome.
Yeah. And when you two first met, were you already studying the microbiome, or how did that connection happen?
Yeah, I was making these trips to visit my family since 2011, and as an adult, and then somehow, I guess through the press, I've done some interviews through the popular press, and somehow got connected with some collaborators, and since I have this kind of unique access to the Yanomami people. Researchers actually from around the world started contacting me, wanting to collaborate with me, and somehow um, uh, kind of connected through various collaborators. And we were looking at the gut microbiome, and of course,
Mm.
to study the gut microbiome, we needed stool samples. And we looked around, and we found Dr. M. Allen-Vercoe is, one of the leading, scientists in the field, and we found a perfect home to send these samples are for research and characterization. Then I think after a candid conversation, she knew that I had a master's degree, and she had asked, "Have you ever thought about a PhD?" I
Mm,
was like, "Well, yeah, I have." Actually, I was looking to get into medical school. I've always had a passion for the clinical setting.
okay.
But then she, after discussions with her and my collaborator, Dr. Larry Weiss, I just fell in love with the discipline and the field, and I thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity to do research, and to continue rediscovering my indigenous heritage as a Yanomami. So she invited me on the program, and I applied, and the rest is history. I've been at University of Guelph for a couple of years now.
What's so special about the lab there at the University of Guelph? Like, I know there's like this whole robo gut, and that's probably the most famous thing you hear in the press with Emma's research. But is there something unique and special about the lab there at the University of Guelph?
Well, I didn't for me I moved to Canada, right? Coming
Yeah,
from just from the outskirts of Philadelphia, and before I get into sort of the laboratory and the special tools that we have, I think one of the most unique thing for me is the lab mates, the people, my
mm,
advisor. I've this community is just phenomenal in working together, sharing ideas, and really just supporting each other in the research. And I was a bit, intimidated by the academic setting, going into the PhD program, but the community here at University of Guelph has been phenomenal. So that's the first thing. The next is learning some of the bench work and the lab work,
mm.
especially under the guidance of Sarah Van Kuren, the lab technician who really helped me, trained me in a lot of the skills that I have and still learning. And I realized that, wow, we really do have the tools and the facilities to really grow the bacterial strains that are
Yeah.
inside, the stools. So, Emma would tell me, in order to get to know a bug, you got to grow a bug. So, and that's what we're doing. So we have, this fantastic team and set of tools to allow us to culture and isolate bacterial strains from the Yanomami gut microbiome.
That's amazing. And where are you in your journey? Are you completed your PhD then, or
No, no, I'm about 2.5 years in.
okay?
I've completed my qualifying exam, and I'm at that stage where I'm going to be in the laboratory day in, day out, running
Yeah.
my experiments, collecting data, and then by next year I will be analyzing the data and writing my thesis. So hopefully by the end of 2025 I'll be able to defend.
Oh, those thesis defenses. I remember I did a master's of science and kinesiology at the University of Waterloo, and I just remember it was always a spectacle, like watching the defenses. Like all the grad students would get together and would. I don't know what it's like at Guelph, but it's just a unique experience. So good luck to you, because I know they can be kind of intense and tough. But such a so what's your thesis about then overall?
Well, overall, and what I love about this research is very exploratory and and very much like the conclusions that other microbiome scientists have come to is that the more we know, the less we know. So
Mm,
we really are scratching the surface. But my in addition to really characterizing and studying the gut microbiome, what that looks like in indigenous peoples, especially the Yanomami, really help us to understand, this link between, the gut microbes and human health and development. But my particular focus is looking at how diet, drives, microbial diversity and the maintenance of the
mm,
microbial diversity within the Yanomami microbiome. And so we have this really cool system known as the RoboGut that kind of simulates, the conditions of the distal colon and allows us to recapitulate a big part of the microbial community within the Yanomami gut microbiome. So I am looking at how we can subject the Yanomami microbiome to various kinds of conditions, and one of them is, to a Western diet or to a Yanomami diet, and to see how that affects microbial diversity, and using the Marobo gut to carry out other experiments, such as maybe introducing Yanomami gut microbes to a Western-like microbial community,
mhm.
and looking at that interaction. So that's what's neat about the RoboGut, is to be able to use that for all kinds of experiments.
That's so cool. After the your PhD, do you have a sort of trajectory in mind, like what the next step is, or are you kind of exploring in that regard too?
Yeah, I'm still exploring. Well, first of all, I'm I'm hooked for life for this research.
Okay.
Anything I can do, yeah, to continue this research. And so, and the reason why is, there's two main outcomes, very broad general outcomes that I'd like out of this research.
Yeah.
And one is that we know, or it's becoming to be more well known, that Western industrialized societies are suffering from all kinds of
Mm.
epidemics of chronic and inflammatory diseases and autoimmune disorders,
Mm.
which is correlated and strongly linked to the reduction of their microbial diversity
Mm.
within their microbiome. So they're missing all kinds of microbes that were once part of their,
Yeah.
ancestral microbiome. Well, if you look at the Yanomami, and particularly you look at my family, they don't suffer from cancer, diabetes,
Mm.
obesity, Crohn's disease, asthma, allergies. I mean, you just name it. And these are the types of diseases that are associated largely with inflammation, right? And they have one of the most diverse gut microbiomes in the world. And
Yeah.
what we're doing in our lab, we're not only are we seeing that, but we're actually isolating this diversity as well. So I hope that this research can help us understand the link, further understand the link between gut microbes and human health, and maybe it could help us develop therapeutic or nutraceutical or something to help, because I do have friends that have multiple sclerosis or
Mm.
Crohn's disease, and
Yeah.
I really want to play a role in combating those disorders. Second major outcome is I really want to bridge science and advocacy in a very actionable, way.
Okay.
Enough of this fluff talk about how we need to give back, and like, no, let's do it, right? Let's
Mm.
let's do some action. So, I would like to see this research, really directly bring benefits to the Yanomami people.
Yeah.
And it's not just me saying it, it's the Yanomami people themselves. And I feel that we can bridge science and advocacy to help bring resources to Yanomami communities that are fighting against incursions of illegal gold miners, spread of introduced diseases, and cultural degradation. So I think we're poised to have, to capitalize on this unique opportunity to advance research and health and to help the Yanomami.
Yeah, that's I definitely want to talk because I read an article about the gold mining recently and how it's bringing a lot of diseases to the area and the impacts it's having on people on indigenous groups in the region. To definitely want to talk about some of those threats. But I remember Emma talking about microbiome diversity is really important. But she said you can't just because you have a missing microbe, it's it's not well understood, but she said you can't just kind of plug and play. So you have this missing microbe, and you can't just say, okay, because this exists in the Yanomami tribe, you can't just take that microbe and put it in, someone else's gut and expect to get similar results. She's like, it kind of is like this community, and it's like they're all kind of working together. And she's like, it's not well understood, but anyways, it was just fascinating how much like we know, but we actually don't know, right?
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, if you let's see, I don't know, I would argue it's pretty tough to grow pineapples in northern Canada, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the ecosystems are not quite there to support,
It's a
these
good
the
example.
fauna.
Yeah.
So same thing with the Yanomami gut microbiome, that there are strains that have co-evolved with the Yanomami, host,
Yeah.
genetics, and also and as well as the diet substrate that has reached their microbes. So their microbes are there because they have the food to survive there.
Mm.
So there's a lot of compounding variables in trying to quote unquote rewild the microbiome of let's say a New York City urbanite, right? And
Yeah.
I think there was a Times article on that, and yeah, and maybe that's just not the answer, because those microbes are found within the Yanomami, and if we were to stick it in someone in New York City, would they survive? And also, could they cause illness and disease? We don't
Mm.
know. So,
Yeah.
but that's why this research is really fundamental and exploratory, and really excited to be part of it. And maybe it's not so much, what microbes are there. I mean, it is so much, but it's what they're doing and what they're
What they're
producing, and
doing,
maybe
right?
they're producing health, secondary metabolites, and other molecules that could be beneficial to the human host. And that's an avenue that I think has potential, because we could easily harvest those metabolites.
Have you looked at your microbiome and compared it to your family? I'm sure you have compared it to your family's
Yeah,
ancestors. And
yeah.
are there similarities or like what's the effect of genetics and lifestyle here?
Yeah, it's not good compared to theirs.
Okay.
By not good, I mean the diversity is similar to that of probably the typical Westerner,
Yeah.
industrialized person. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would like to maybe do a deeper dive as I spend more time with my family looking at my gut microbiome as I immerse myself with my family and eat what they
Yeah.
eat and see some long-term effects. We did look at my skin
Yeah.
with my collaborator Larry Weiss out of Weiss Biosciences, and they're doing a wonderful project in characterizing the Yanomami skin microbiome, and we're hoping to release a paper on this soon. But we did see that my skin microbiome started shifting towards that of the Yanomami people
Interesting.
over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. So at the beginning of before I left, my skin was very similar to a healthy cohort found within a human microbiome project. However, over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, we saw that my diversity greatly increased and enriched to that of the Yanomami people. And we're finding out that this diversity of microbes that are living on their skin, they're not just hanging out there. They're doing all kinds of things of providing
Mm.
nutrients, UV protection, all
Mm.
kinds of metabolic pathways that are beneficial to the Yanomami skin. They have beautiful skin, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
all these these companies, L'Oreal, or they're trying
Yeah.
to find some secret. It's just like I'm pretty sure my mom probably has it right on her skin. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because their skin is just resilient, strong, and healthy. So yeah,
Do you feel like you're just acquiring that because of skin to skin contact, like with your family? Is that kind of how that's happening, you think? Or
yeah, good question, good question. Yeah, I think the microbiome diversity is highly environmental. So your microbiome is a direct reflection of your surrounding ecosystem.
okay.
And that's a great point you're bringing up, because we look at microbiomes as sort of this isolated extrapolation of some data point, some
Yeah.
sample. But your microbiome is a reflection of your interaction with your environment,
Mm.
and your ecosystem, and which is a reflection of your culture and the reflection of your lifestyle and diet. So when I look at, let's say, data points of the Yanomami microbiome, I don't see just um, a bunch of numbers or taxonomic groups of microbial strains. I see a reflection of who they are as hunter
Mm.
gatherers and as a communal people that live together, that live intimately with their surrounding ecosystem. So yeah, I would argue that their skin microbiome is a big part of what comprises it, is because of their interaction with the surrounding environment, which is all natural rainforest.
Yeah.
No pollutants, no it's just the trees and the soil.
I wonder what someone's microbiome would look like if they worked in like a sterilized kind of environment, or, like, I don't know, like a hospital setting or something like that. Um, like if there's
Yeah,
not,
or
yeah.
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, that's what I was gonna
Y- y-
say. I mean, I like like I'm sure there's so many different environments to kind of research, but that one kind of comes to mind, like somewhere where, especially like you think post COVID, like everything just feels a lot more sterilized. Emma and I talked about this about like, yeah, especially with children, for instance. Her concern was like whether they would have this kind of fear of germs going forward, right? And the overuse of hand sanitizers and all this sort of thing. So I was just thinking about this kind of over sterilized environment and what that would have on the impact it would have on the skin microbiome, I guess.
Oh, absolutely, and the gut too.
Yeah,
This idea of the hygiene hypothesis and the missing microbe hypothesis, that that we we have changed our human ecology to the extent where we just are not only exposing ourselves less to the microbes in the environment, but we're also adding all these kinds of stressors that affect the diversity of the microbiome, and
yeah,
things from like anti overuse and misuse of antibiotics, ultra processed foods, all these things that play a role, sedentary lifestyles, limited interaction with your surrounding ecosystem,
yeah,
and so it's an issue. And then this extreme practices of sanitation, which and I think it's a dogma that we're trying to they're trying to shift this, with the general public, that most bacteria are actually really good and they're actually really important to keep you healthy and to keep you
yeah.
safe. And I'm hoping we're continuing that trend of educating the public that we need microbes.
we've been kind of struggling this with my 6-year-old daughter because definitely coming out of COVID, encouraging her to wash her hands, and it got to a point where it was like really excessive, and we've had to have conversations with her about like there are good germs and there are bad germs, and like it's important to wash your hands, but excessive washing, like excessive concern about these germs is also not healthy, and it's like you can see her trying to process that, and she doesn't quite get it, but so just trying to tell her like when are the most important times. I wonder if other parents are struggling with that, especially coming out of COVID. But
Well, I'm a dad, and I have a
okay,
6-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter,
okay,
a 6-year-old son, 10-year-old
yeah,
daughter,
yeah,
and yeah, it's trying to explain when she's 5 or 6 about this world that you cannot see,
yeah,
and they're crawling all over your skin,
yeah,
and you could see in her eyes like, what in the world are you telling me, Dad?
yeah, yeah,
But no, there's ways of approaching it, sure, and I think you know. There should be more. My focus really is like the diet, and
yeah,
I try to teach my kids and my colleagues and peers. Well, not so much my colleague, but my peers and friends that what you eat, you're giving food to the gut microbiome, and it's not just for your body; it's also for the microbes. So just
mm,
think of that, when you're
yeah,
eating pizza or
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about how you got connected back with your family and the Yanomami in the Yanomami. So you were born in the United States, is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in a neighborhood in Philadelphia. Yeah.
Okay. And so, what was that like? Did you grow up with your mom around? Like maybe start from there, and then I think from what I gathered is like she left at some point, and but I haven't been able to connect the dots, and I'm sure this is new for many people. So maybe if you don't mind walking through that story a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just at a conference in San Diego and talking about this research very candidly. And one of the I'm finding out that one of the main questions that I get is like, how the heck did you get involved? Like, how did you get
Yeah.
these samples?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, I am Yanomami. I'm a
Yeah.
member of the Iroquois community located in the Venezuelan Amazon. And the subjects of my research, or the samples from which these researches are obtained, are my mom, my family.
Yeah.
So, and then they're like, what? so, so to get to that point, I can, yeah, give you a very short history. My father was an American anthropologist out of Penn State University, and part of his doctoral research project was to make contact and live with a Yanomami community located in the Venezuelan rainforest.
Mm,
And at the time, they're popularized as one of the world's last relatively isolated indigenous groups, with limited to
okay.
no contact with other non-Yanomami groups, especially with outsiders. And and I guess in that time period, it was a subject of deep debate and controversy within social sciences, because for them, they felt like this was a unique opportunity to study a group that has largely been unaffected for the most part compared to other
Mm,
indigenous groups by
mm,
colonialization and so on.
yeah.
And so think of a people that live in the rainforest, and they most of the part are they don't have any clothes. They hunt with a bow and arrow.
Yeah.
um, their counting system is one, two, and many, and that's it. There's no calendar, so there's no such thing as year, day, month, time, anything like that. And everything they needed to live and survive and extract was extracted from the surrounding rainforest.
Mm,
They are hunter gatherers, but they're also horticulturalists, and so
mm.
they cultivate plantains and tobacco and other cultigens. But they're also semi-nomadic, so they're constantly
I was
moving
gonna
around
ask
the
you that. Like,
forest.
do they stay in one place or are they nomadic? Okay.
Traditionally speaking, no, because the Amazonian ground is actually not fertile for agriculture and horticulture. So
Okay.
their gardens yield enough food to last them maybe 2 to 3 years. So they're constantly looking for other places to develop gardens and so on. And sometimes they completely run out of food, and they'll engage what is called a wayumi, where they'll just simply abandon the village and just wander the forest, and revert to strictly hunting gathering, lifestyles.
Mm,
And my dad went down there to study that, to study diet and to study hunting patterns
yeah.
and whatnot, and see, and so coming from Philadelphia, going into the wilds of the Amazon, was a huge change for him.
Yeah.
And of course, there's all this controversy about the Yanomami being have this propensity for warfare and violence, and a lot of it's been debunked. And
Mm.
I'm really, that's sort of a controversy of the past, and I'm not really, too much involved. But I grew up in that, within that field of anthropology. But my dad fell in love with the people. He characterizes it as the essence of what it is to be a human being.
Mm.
Just when you wake up, what do? You just got to find food. And you
Yeah.
do that with your family. Didn't no worries about taxes and bills and upward mobility. And so what was supposed to be a 15-month research program ended up being a stay of over the span of 12 years in the Amazon.
Wow.
So
And
during
just
those
living with the Yanomami people for those 12
ye-
years?
during those 12 years, of course, he had to leave and finish his degree, and he also had to renew his permits and
Yeah.
everything. So he's all in the up and up with the Venezuelan government. But yeah, so over the course of the 12 years, he learned their language, he moved in with the community and
Yeah.
walked and tracked and was adopted into the community. And
Okay.
you could probably connect the dots, but during those 12 years
Yeah.
is when he met my mom.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
My
Yeah.
mom, Yarima, who was the younger brother of the headman at the time. And Yarima means windy, so because she was
Okay.
born on a windy day, so
Okay.
Yarimo means like a gust of wind.
Okay.
And and she took a liking to my dad, and really, they both developed a friendship, which turned into a romance, and they both married according to Yanomami customs. And
Yes.
of course, when you hear that term married, it's not like this grandiose celebration, this Shakespearean notion of like, flowers and
Yeah.
wedding
Yeah.
dresses and
Yeah. Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
It's you take your hammock and you hang it next to your spouses, and that's it. You're married.
That's
Like
it. Okay.
yeah, that signifies that you're husband and wife.
Okay. And so you said, like, he was essentially adopted into the community. So was this was there any sort of shame put on your mom at all for marrying this white man from America at
Mm.
all, or?
Good question. I mean, it was the first thing in their history in that
Yeah.
community for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no shame. In fact, it was her decision to marry my dad. She wanted to
Yeah.
marry my dad. Yeah,
Yeah.
she wanted to. Yeah, she really, you know, I mean, well, I can't put words in her mouth, but I can only imagine what it was like for her. She had never seen an outsider before. And
Yeah.
most of those people had never seen it, and they all these stories about, was he a spirit that descended from the heavens? Is he immortal?
Yes. Yeah.
Like they didn't know. But and in fact, he didn't even know their language, when he
Yeah.
first met them. But then he learned their language, and ultimately probably saw him more as a human being than a spirit. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um
In Yanomami culture, is there like this sort of lifetime commitment to somebody, or what does that sort of look like? Or are people kind of in and out of relationships, or yeah, I don't know. Just curious about.
yeah. Yeah, good question. And before I say that, I think, I can only recount, my father's experience, from stories growing up, but
Yeah.
he does have a book called Into the Heart, which really gets into what it was like for him living and studying and falling in love with my mom.
Cool.
So I recommend reading that. But,
Yeah.
the more I come to learn is the Yanomami people are just it's very similar to other they're humans, right? And they
Yeah.
have human
Mm.
behaviors and human
Yeah.
desires and
Yeah.
human faults, right? So I've come to find that yeah, they do have partners, but they can change.
Yeah.
I don't know what their divorce rate is, but I think I mean it's nothing compared to divorce rates in northern, western, industrialized
Yeah.
societies. I don't find that anything unique.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think there is that concept of a husband and wife, monogamous
Yeah.
pair.
Yeah.
But of course, there's all kinds of relationship dynamics as well.
Yeah. And how many people are part of now? Would you say, like, would you say Yanomami tribe, or like is it a group, or how would you kind of describe, like, I guess, that community, or is it just a
hmm
Yanomami community, or yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, terminology is something we've always been challenged with, and with just trying to describe who the Yanomami are. But I wouldn't. The closest thing you could call it tribe, but as the anthropological definition of a tribe, they're not exactly a tribe because they don't
Okay.
really coalesce under a single leader or a single,
Okay.
representative of of the Yanomami population.
Mm,
But there are so they're broken down by their geographies.
mm,
So there are some that live in the Parima Highlands, and of course you have the Upper Orinoco lowland region. Then you have live in the Sierras or in the border regions. And then of course you have Yanomami population that lives in Brazil. So there's split roughly half and half between Brazil and Venezuela,
mm,
roughly. So, I call them, we can call them indigenous peoples, but
mm,
I wouldn't call them tribe, and they are comprised of these villages or communities, sorry, called Shabanos, and each Shabano is sort of its own autonomous unit.
mm.
So Irokai Teri is my, Shabano that I identify with, but also have family in Hasapua Teri and then Wanapua Teri. So they
Okay.
all live in this sort of open roundhouse structure that's comprised of sticks and poles and vines
Yeah.
with a thatch roof, open air. There's no rooms, there's no like walls that divide, family units. So we all see each other when we wake up in the morning, which
Yeah.
for an American, it was really hard for me to adapt to because like we do everything in private, right? Like we
Yes.
we
Yeah.
pee in private, we sleep in
Yeah.
private, we eat in
Yeah.
private.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's no such thing as alone time.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no
But
private kind of space there. So,
yeah, no. So, I would say there are roughly around 35,000 people,
okay.
give or take, comprised of several hundred of these Shabano units that
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
that are dispersed around the forest. Yeah.
I saw that term when I was looking at some videos, Shabano. Like I think one of the channels was named that. I don't know if that's your channel or,
Hmm.
but I definitely saw that, and I wonder what that was. So that explains that for sure.
Oh yeah, Shabano Media, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
we can talk more about that, but yeah, that's sort of the digital media outreach of the foundation to help, bring some imagery and videos to the world to show them who the Yanomami are.
yeah. I went through a bunch
Um,
of them. It was so fascinating to watch so many of those videos. Yeah, yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so just to kind of speed it up, to answer your question, ultimately, is so once my parents married, my brother or my father, in Yanomami culture, it's customary for the wife to move to the man's husband's village if he's from a different village. So this idea of him, inviting my mom to see his people and his family in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, was not foreign. In fact, my mom was also very intrigued and interested and very
mm,
curious. What she didn't know was that it was a universe completely different to what she's had ever known in entire life. So when she had arrived, in the outside world, she had seen cars, electricity, concrete, steel, all these things for the first time.
yeah,
So she was experiencing really deep culture shock. And but so lo and behold, we were this kind of unique intercultural bilingual family that made
hmm,
trips back and forth. I was born soon after. My sister was born in the jungle on a banana leaf,
okay,
and my brother was born in New Jersey. And over the course of the 5 years, we did our best to try to make trips back and forth, but it's challenging, it's difficult, it's
mm,
expensive, it's dangerous, and I think our trips became less and less frequent. And my mom, really, she adapted, but she had a tough time,
mm,
living up here. She had no one to speak to.
hmm,
She couldn't go to the creeks to go crabbing and fishing.
hmm,
She was, she's comes from this completely competent warrior, master of the rainforest to, barely knowing how to use a credit card or work a
sure,
TV.
yeah,
So I can only imagine it became very sad and depressing for her.
yeah,
So when I was 5, she made a very difficult choice to separate from the family. And she remained in the Amazon, and I remained up here in the United States. And that's would be the last time I'd see my mom for 20
oh,
years. Yeah.
wow, yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you remember that time at 5 years old of
Yeah.
when? Yeah,
Yeah, at 5, I was speaking Yanomami, and I don't really remember the uniqueness or specialness of my mom as this, indigenous person that was sort of, um, exoticized throughout the world. To me, she was just mom. She made me
yeah,
breakfast.
yeah,
She would chastise me or whatever. It's just
yeah,
a person, right?
yeah,
So when I lost her at 5, I was really hard on me, and I couldn't understand. One day you had a mom, and one day you don't, and my son is 6 years old, and that's about the time that I lost my mom, and I can only imagine, what would be like for him if he just
yeah,
mom just disappeared.
yeah,
So Yeah, so it was really difficult for me, and I internalized her leaving as abandonment as a child, and
Mm.
during those 20 years, dealt with a lot of challenges in my identity and what it is
Yeah.
to be a Yanomami,
Yeah.
and my mother leaving. So in 2011, I decided to embark on a sort of personal journey, a personal quest to go back
Mm.
to the Amazon rainforest and to find and reunite with my mom, and didn't know she was alive or where she was. And of course, I did that under the wing of Venezuelan anthropologist Hortense Caballero Arias, and she was instrumental in paving the way to finding my mom in 2011.
And how did you know it was her? Like, just looked like her
Oh,
still, or
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, we still had pictures of her, and
yeah,
and she, when we arrived at the village to where we thought she might be, Hasupaway, we asked, is Yarima here? And they said, yes. And who are you? And we said, well, this is David, son of Yanima. I'm here. And everybody got really excited. So someone had run into the forest to go fetch her. She was out, harvesting plantains or
yeah,
manioc. And
yeah,
so they brought me into the village and set my hammock. And I was immediately mobbed by the Yanomami. They had hands up my shirt, down my pants. They were just touching, because they don't have facial hair,
yeah,
beard.
yeah,
So they're just like rubbing my beard, touching my
yeah,
nose, pulling my
yeah,
ear.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm Yanomami, but I
yeah,
was just like, I was some kid that grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, right? I was just like any other person. So I was in culture shock, right? And I had
yeah,
no idea what they were telling at me. And then it just dawned on me as I looked into their dark almond eyes and their dark hair and the sticks in their noses. With the women, and with the women, they wear the sticks in their noses. I realized that, wow, I'm not just some explorer, reaching the Yanomami for the first time or whatever. It's like, this is a family reunion. These are
yeah,
my aunts and uncles,
yeah,
my cousins and nieces and nephews. I'm
yeah,
like, this is my people. This is my kin. So it was really, really, really cool moment for me to meet my family. And then about 2 hours of that, that's when my mom walked into the village, and I stood out of my hammock. I knew it was her instantly. I didn't know
mm,
she knew it was me instantly. It would be interesting if a mom would ever could recognize a son's face after 20 years. But
yeah,
yeah, we approached each other, and I couldn't speak Yanomami, she couldn't speak English, so all I could do really is put my hand on her shoulder, and I said, "Hi, mom, it's me, David, your son, and I'm home." And we just broke down crying after
oh,
that. It was really emotional reunion, and
yeah,
I bet she probably never thought she would ever see her kids ever again, and
yeah.
I thought that I would never see my mother ever again, and here we were. Yeah.
Wow, that's so powerful, Dave. When you're after she had left for at the age of 5, um, did you feel any sort of resentment towards the Yanomami peoples at all? Just because, yeah, I don't know. And then was when you then made that reunion, did that all kind of go away? I was just wondering if, yeah, you felt any sort of neglectful feelings or resentment towards the Yanomami culture and people in some way.
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. So when I internalized my mother's leaving as abandonment, growing up, uh, I thought, why should I be proud of being Yanomami if my cultural heritage, my bloodline goes through my mom and left to me?
Yeah,
And I didn't want to have anything to do. So I renounced my heritage growing as a teenager
yeah,
and adolescent and
yeah.
young 20s. And so yeah, and I thought, I just wanted to be a typical,
American.
American
Yeah,
kid, just
yeah,
play baseball, get good grades, go to the movies. And
yeah.
then I was always constantly reminded of this, other half of me, this connection to this culture that's so radically different. And I battled with that. And so yeah, I did have resentment, of course, for my mom, leaving, and for my mom, and for being Yanomami. And so I do describe a little bit more of that. I kind of many years ago wrote a memoir called The Way Around.
Mm,
So The Way Around is a rough translation of my Yanomami name, which is Anyapoa.
okay.
And as it was explained to me, that an Anyapoa is kind of like a way around an obstacle, or like, and like I left my village for 20 years and I just took a long way around back home.
Hmm.
So, um, but yeah, that you can definitely, um, kind of get a little bit more of my experiences and sentiments of what it was like, resenting my mom and my
Yeah,
culture.
yeah. Did your mom have any? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
You look
but
like,
to follow up,
yeah,
with your question, yeah, back in 2011, I was so happy. I knew then and there that why my mom left, the events, it didn't matter. Why begrudge the past? And
Yeah.
is it going to change anything? No, she
Yeah.
was alive and I'm alive, and I'm ready to embark on this new relationship with my mom, and rediscovering my Yanomami heritage.
Yeah. Did your mom have any kids after she had left? Like again, so do you have any brothers and sisters there?
Yeah, she did. Unfortunately, one passed away very young, around
Mm.
9 or 11. And he, in 2011, I had met my brother, or half brother, but
Yeah.
they don't do half brothers there. So he's my brother, and
Yeah.
Oshe, his brother,
Mm.
Oshewa. So he was my Oshe, and he was such a cool guy. He really, like, we were attached at the hip. We
Mm.
went fishing together, hunting together.
Mm.
um we chopped trees together. It was just so much fun. So I had my mom. I had that. When I found my mom, I felt, feelings that I thought whenever, that kind and loving care and a mother's
Yeah.
touch. Like, my friends grew up with their moms making them peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and mac and cheese, right? So
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah.
But my mom, when I met her in 2011, every morning would make me a fresh wad of, like, tobacco, and we chew tobacco,
Okay.
just the leaf.
Yeah.
And to me, that was like that loving, tender care of a
Yeah.
mom. And, like, oh man, my mom, thank you so much. You made me fresh wad of tobacco.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was really funny. But and then my brother was really instrumental in showing me the ways of the rainforest.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, unfortunately, he was in a hunting accident,
Okay.
where a big tree had fallen on him
Uh,
and crushed him, and killed
mm.
him. And now it was a very hard loss for me and for my mother, obviously, and for our family. So, I honor him by, always trying to do good work here, and also to, take care of his kids when I get down there.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Hmm.
Yeah. The wad of tobacco is like the real big league chew, right? You got going on there. Do you
Exactly.
remember that gum? Do you remember Big League Chew? I
Oh,
don't know.
big
Did
league,
you have?
of course. Yeah.
Okay, I
I
wasn't
mean,
sure
I
if you
played
get that in the
baseball
States,
my whole
but yeah.
life, and
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, the bubble gum. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, they had the bubble gum, and then they actually had the tobacco. Yeah, of course.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
In high
Yeah.
school, we couldn't chew the
No,
tobacco.
yeah. If your mom was around until the age of 5, something Emma said was really interesting that I didn't know. She said essentially, from what they noticed in the research, is that your gut microbiome gets set in those early years, right? Like between the ages
Hmm.
of 0 to 5 or 6. So you had your mom around for the age of 5. What were you eating during that time? Like I know you said your microbiome was not similar to the Yanomami peoples, but what were you eating during that time? Because if you were eating maybe some of those traditional foods, perhaps, I don't know, just curious
No,
about that.
yeah, great point. And I also, half of my genetics is from my mom, and does that play a role in
Yeah,
the host microbe interaction, especially with the immune system? So I don't know. I'm sure it does, but to actually, before age 5, the initial microbiome comes from your mom as you're born through the vaginal
yeah,
canal,
yeah,
and that's where you're seated.
yeah,
So I can only imagine, being seeded of microbes from my mom, that may have been, largely different from the microbe, biome of a typical Westerner. So
yeah.
maybe from the very beginning, much earlier than that, I had a different start, different culture, I guess you could say.
Mm,
But the first 5 years, when we lived in Jersey, I don't think there was anything. I think our diet was very similar to the typical person. We had
okay,
chicken,
okay, yeah,
mixed vegetables, but we also
yeah,
ate junk food and breads and stuff like that. I would say maybe our diet. The biggest contrast would be that our fiber intake drastically, reduced in Western
hmm,
industrialized society. But we're in the jungle. We eat a lot of plantains, and a lot of, which is a staple diet of my community. We fish. We also eat tubercles, insects, bugs, caterpillars, grubworms,
mm,
all kinds of, berries and nuts and fruits, and it's really cool. Sugar cane. And what I love about, living with my family, is that whenever we're going from point A to point B, it's never about it is about the destination, but you always find something along the way. Maybe a monkey that we can hunt, or maybe it's some mushrooms that started,
mm,
we could harvest, and or we found, we could collect some palm fruits. It's just so cool, right? Where you just wander through the forest, and, like, everything's right there at your fingertips. I mean, it's not easy to get all the food, But when you do it with your family and you do it with your friends, it's such an awesome time.
Talk about practicing mindfulness, right? Like you said, it's not just about going from A to B, but like there's so much going on between those two destination points, right? Like it's such a challenge today to get people to be mindful, but that sounds like such a mindful practice that they're practicing every single day. Hey,
Absolutely, 100%. I agree.
yeah, that would have been shock for you, like I imagine, in terms of uh, incorporating some of those ways of eating, perhaps, or no?
As an adult, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, when I came back, I tried to keep an open mind, and I did. But I've at first I didn't want to chew their tobacco, but eventually now I like bete, and so bete's tobacco, and that's one of the first things I ask for when I arrive, and they give it to me. So plantains. And I think my gut goes through a period of a couple of weeks of it's
adjustment.
just,
Yeah,
yeah, I would say I live a rather particularly probably bland and sterile environment here,
yeah.
in the West. But then when you go down there, you're just blasted, with the water, the soil, the dirt. I mean, we don't use soap, we to go in the bathe and everything. And even though we don't use all these chemicals and detergents and whatnot, the Yanomami are clean. They don't stink, they don't smell,
Mhm,
they're healthy, and you know so. But for me, it's like a huge transition, to acclimate to that. So I
mhm.
always get sick, diarrhea or fevers or
Yeah,
something. It's just I'm trying to adjust. But yeah, the foods, I never know what I'm eating sometimes. Sometimes it could be an arm of a monkey, or it could be a caiman. But then after a while, oh, the food's great. We eat caimans, armadillo, monkey, agoutis. It's just the food is really, really cool. And every time they, we come back from a small hunt, or they come back from a much larger hunt, it's really, really an exciting time. We get to
mm,
see the bounty, and it gets shared among the community. Yeah.
yeah. What is a typical, day's meal look like? Like, is it broken up in chunks? Is it constantly eating? And is it, like, kind of set things during the day? Like, yeah, I don't know, is there certain practices around there? Or tell me about kinda what a day's worth of eating looks like.
Sure, sure. Um, well, basically you eat only when there's food, and so there's no really mealtime.
Okay.
Generally, when you wake up, at the sun rises around 4:35, and it's still relatively cool. Actually, it's really nice time, and w- you know whoever wants to just go out to the forest to take care of their tasks, whether it's collecting firewood or chopping trees or go fishing or hunting
Mhm,
or foraging, try to do that right away before that strong equatorial sun comes down
mm,
midday. But they don't really eat breakfast. They might eat a plantain or two, but they
mhm,
chew tobacco. That's really important. And
mm,
tobacco, we know nicotine curtails hunger and gives that extra kick to go out.
okay,
And then around midday, generally speaking, we come back with what we fished or harvested, and we cook it and we share it among our communities. And however, if somebody comes back at like 1 in the morning from a night hunt, and they bring food, you don't just wait till morning. You get up out of your hammock and you eat. So
okay,
it's a
okay.
very feast or famine mentality, I would
Yeah,
argue.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And the food supply is largely, affected by the amount of plantains they have in their gardens. But
okay.
it's really cool. You never know what you're going to eat that day. You just don't
Yeah,
know. It could be
yeah.
it could be an armadillo. It could be an anaconda. It could be
Is
a
that
monkey.
stressful, or, like, to not know where your
That's a
food's
really
coming
great.
from?
It's a really good question. It's like a really good psychology question, because we are super stressed here, right? But that
Yeah,
kind of stress is very different from the stress down there. And I feel like this stress, or these pressures of stress, is something that we've evolved to live with naturally,
yeah,
right? When are we going
yeah,
to have food? Not going to have food. But you don't see, mania or depression or PTSD or suicide is not, it's hardly fathomable, among the Yanomami. So it is a kind of stress, but I feel like that's the kind of stress we're meant to have. But the type of stress that we have up here, yeah, I'm sure, as you know, that's not something that we were meant to have. And so, it is stressful, but I just feel like, one of the advantages of living in a communal, egalitarian like society is that we're always taking care of each other.
Yeah.
When you come back with a hunt, you don't keep that for yourself. You
Yeah.
got to really important that you share that with the rest of the community. So
Yeah.
it's a really great social mechanism of reciprocity that allows them to survive for thousands of years in the jungle, a very harsh climate. Yeah.
The food itself, like in terms of just taste, like is there stuff that they use like, are there spices available, or what do they use to kind of, or is it just really just absorbing the natural flavors of whatever you're eating?
Natural flavors, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
At first, yeah, I gotta admit, at first I snuck in some ketchup and some hot sauce. So, I even brought a cutting board and a
Okay.
knife so I could
Yeah.
slice up the plantains and
Yeah.
then fry them in a pot of oil. 'Cause,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but I stopped doing that because it's actually very impractical.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the natural flavors, it's hard to get used to it at first.
Yeah.
And our foods here, what I've discovered or at least realized is that they're so supplemented with so much salt and sugar, really
Yeah.
surprising. And then all these preservatives that's supposed to help make it taste better. So it is an adjustment to get used to what food is supposed to taste like in
Yeah.
its natural state. But
Yeah.
then after a while, yeah, it gets you really appreciate the flavors, the natural flavors of the food down there.
So you talked about like some sources of protein and meat that obviously are not common here for Westerners. What stood out for you for some of those? Like you talked about monkeys, you talked about anacondas, you talked about yeah, I don't know. That would have been challenging for sure, I would imagine. But like,
Yeah,
what did
yeah.
you appreciate about, I guess, those animals in particular, like from a taste perspective, or I don't know.
hmm I still say my favorite food is the boa constrictor. It's kind of
Okay.
like, because it's just a mussel and
Yeah.
similar to like scallops, which I love here. And
Okay.
it's just the muscle and the oils that are within the
Yeah.
muscle and
Yeah.
that white meat,
Yeah.
snake is so good, so good. And especially when they catch a big like anaconda that could feed a village for a week. It's amazing.
God. Yeah.
So much food. And as far as like red meat, peccary, yeah, if you catch a peccary,
What's
yeah, really,
peccary?
really good. Kind of like a wild boar type
Oh,
type
okay.
animal. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So dangerous to hunt because they can
Yeah.
charge at you, but
Yeah.
very, very good food. And then I guess you could say little snacks, grub worms.
Mm.
Beetle larvae. That they
Okay.
harvest. Pretty yummy. You kind of slurp up after you roast them in the fires. You really slurp up the juiciness of the inside.
Yeah.
And then plantains. As far as fruits, the palm fruits we call it edaveshi
Okay.
in Yanomami, but those are really, really good. So, but those are the foods I think tend to really stick out during the course of my stay.
Yeah. I heard from, like, as in the Florida Everglades, there's the whole python problem, right?
Hmm
I've heard about how they tell folks not to necessarily eat them just because potentially high mercury content or things like that.
Mm.
I don't know if that would be the same case like with anacondas at all, or but I mean, you're speaking about the Yanomami peoples as like very healthy, but just curious about um yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, that's a really, really great point, and it's really important for the audience to understand that how I characterize Yanomami is based on my experience with my family.
Yes.
That is really remote, minimally impacted. And of course, if we were to stay with a community that has been missionized, let's say by Protestants for 50, 60 years, I think that their experiences would be very different.
Mm,
And then the Yanomami in Venezuela have different histories and levels of contact with the politics, and then Brazil is very different as well. So yeah, I want to be careful not to say that this is what all the Yanomami do. And there's a
okay.
dynamic of integration and influence. So yeah, I'd like to point out that there are communities that that have schools and they're taught by Yanomami teachers that are Yanomami.
Yeah.
Also, there are Yanomami that have learned to become medics, and you even see Yanomami missionaries, which is
Okay.
an interesting phenomena, uh, um, spreading the gospel throughout the territory. But nevertheless, I think it's important to recognize and acknowledge that. So, um, and, going back to my experience, this is what I've come to learn and know within my family, and then Brazil is different. And then, sorry to circle back to your, I kind of forgot your original question.
No,
um,
that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to understand if you're potentially eating some of these meats, like snake, for
mm,
instance, and there's concern, like in Florida, they said like don't eat those pythons
right.
because they're potentially higher mercury. So just wondering if that
Mhm.
kind of translates over to the Yanomami peoples, I guess.
Absolutely. No. And yeah, so great point. There are Yanomami communities that are live downstream or very close, proximal to these illegal mining camps.
Mm,
And these mining camps dump mercury into the surrounding ecosystem because they use mercury to extract, the gold,
yeah,
um, and uh, and there's this process called biomagnification where it gets into the ecosystem. And just think of it, little fish, the mercury gets in the little fish, the big
yes,
fish eat the bigger fish, and so on, and
exactly.
it gets
Yeah,
sequestered in the liver. And there's certain studies. I remember a study where one indigenous community had, when they had their fish had migrated over 200 miles from a mining site, and there was mercury, found in those fish. So mercury poisoning is a big issue. In fact, if you Google it right now, it's pretty big in the news on how prevalent mercury poisoning is among the Yanomami in Brazil. In Venezuela, you don't really see data coming out of Venezuela. It's kind of a black hole.
yeah,
They don't tend to, do that kinds of research in Venezuela. But despite the differences in the political atmosphere, we can argue that there are Yanomami communities in Venezuela that are subjected to mercury poisoning as well. It's a shame, yeah, for sure. So it's something that I'm deathly afraid of happening to my family, because right now, uh, my experiences, I think, are the result of their isolation, and we got to recognize that their isolation is what's protecting them.
mm,
But just saying that they should just let's just keep them isolated, I think, is a bit foolish, because if we don't do anything, the miners are just going to keep invading. There's going to be
right,
deforestation. There's just going to be bad people that are constantly going to try to.
right,
So, and that kind of brings to light on the future, of the Yanomami people.
yeah. Uh, Definitely want to talk about some of those threats and dangers, but just before leaving this topic, curious about when like living in the Amazon. I've always been curious about what it would be like to visit there, but it just seems like a scary place, honestly. Like just thinking with the wildlife and the conditions and such. Is that would that be the case? I mean, obviously, the Yanomami peoples are they're indigenous and they live within these lands, and but even for them, can it be dangerous at times or?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, um, life in the forest, I would argue, is relatively simple, but it's very hard. It's dangerous and be difficult. And you're right. They nobody knows the cycles of the rainforest of that region like the Yanomami
Yeah.
people. That have lived there for thousands of years, and so
Mhm.
um, and they are very familiar with how to interact and navigate, the challenges and the dangers of the rainforest. But there are things happen, and my brother is a good example. Just it's a freak accident.
Yeah.
Tree. You always got to be worried of trees. And actually, I remember in one of my trips, my mom, I was out with my family and we were fishing in the creeks, and there was this big, like this squall, right? And what's dangerous is that the trees just start moving, and you see these branches falling, and my mom comes screaming, and it was really interesting. She remembered the word tree in English, and she was saying "chui, chui," and pointing to the sky, and I knew
Yeah.
exactly what she was trying to tell me. So
Yeah.
we ran and found shelter underneath a
Yeah.
boulder. So yeah, no, those things happen. And disease, I would argue,
Mhm.
is infectious
Mhm.
disease. You know, when you're young in 20s and 30s, you can combat malaria and other
Mhm.
kinds of diseases, but it's tough when you're older, 50, 60. There's no hospital that can try to
Yeah.
revive you, or so malaria, I would argue, is a big challenge down there, and I've
Okay.
had it 7 times myself, and it
Ugh.
was it was yeah, terrible. But malaria is another issue, which is increased by the presence of gold miners as well.
Yeah. But I'm not hearing anything about wildlife. Like,
Oh,
in terms of wildlife concerns, like, are they a threat
hmm
to humans at all or?
of course, yeah. I mean, when
Yeah.
you hunt an animal is going to defend itself.
Yeah.
So a peccary could charge at you. A poisonous snake could bite you.
Yeah.
I've seen a boy get bitten by or seen him suffering from the bite of a poisonous snake, the Bothrop snake, Bothrops anthracis, which is one of the world's most poisonous venomous
Okay.
snakes.
Okay.
So yeah, there's snakes, venomous snakes. There's other things like these tiny little, I forget the term in Yanomami, but these scorpions, little black scorpions. If you get stung by one of those, you're out for like 3-4 days. Yeah. So, and yeah, so it does sometimes, what's his name? Herzog, the filmmaker, he characterizes it as this jungle of death and destruction, always trying
Yeah.
to eat you. And it
Yeah.
feels that way sometimes. And yeah, yeah, it does feel that way. But,
But again, you said the stress
but
is maybe feels different. I don't know. Like that'd be
yeah,
stressful for someone like
yeah.
for someone like me who has no exposure to this stuff, right?
Yeah, constant bite of mosquitoes and
Yeah.
gnats and everything.
Yeah.
But when you sit back on it though, and it seems so hard for us, and then you think of the Yanomami that lived in harmony and all of that,
Yeah.
really, really brings perspective how much you respect them.
Yeah.
That they can find happiness and harmony within the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to some of these the concerns that you've been talking about in the Amazon and some of these threats and dangers to the Yanomami peoples. What are some of the ones that really you want people to be really aware of and that you're concerned about?
Yeah, just I think two things. One is well, the most prevalent and most pressing, I think, are the gold miners that are coming in there. Gold miners, because I mean, that's a direct, outright violent conflict. They
Yeah.
come with machine guns. The Yanomami have bows and arrows, and they are absolutely destroying the swaths of the Amazon rainforest to the point where it just can't come back. And they're poisoning the rivers with water, with mercury. Riverways with mercury, and bringing disease. And disease, it's not uncommon for a disease to wipe out an entire village, entire community. Every time I visit, I hear stories of communities that would say they're just no more. The people are just simply gone because they've all died of tuberculosis or malaria or so on. So it's really sad. It's really
Do
pressing.
governments try to come in at all and knowing that this is happening, but at least like like not only trying to maybe prevent the gold mining problem, which is probably very difficult, but at least trying to support those communities with medical interventions or yeah.
No, it's tough, and I don't. I'm not very much involved with bureaucracy and the political actions of the Venezuelan and Brazilian governments, but I think one thing is that it's the law of the jungle.
Hmm.
And it's really, really hard, but
Yeah.
nevertheless I think they have a responsibility. So I know the Brazilian government right now is taking action and using military force to evict a lot of these gold miners, but it's no secret that these gold miners flee into Venezuela, take refuge, kind of wait for the storm to calm down,
Yeah.
and then go back into Brazil. And of course, there's a lot of gold mining in Venezuela that kind of spill over into Yanomami territory.
Hmm.
It's just sad. I mean, the Amazon has a lot of resources, to be, and that these rare earth elements that
Yeah.
the governments want to expropriate, but at the cost of what? The Amazon rainforest and the people that live there. That's an outright violation of their rights, to survive. So, I would argue, I agree, it's a form of genocide for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Um,
there's this National Geographic show that's led by hosted by Mariana Van Zeller. Oh the name of the show is I'm forgetting it, but she's gone. She always looks at all these kind of underworld kind of forms of crime, and she went into the Amazon to look at gold mining and such. But the common story that she always finds is it's not the actual gold miners. The gold miners themselves are people who are maybe are very impoverished. They're looking to just find a way forward, but they themselves are getting exploited by something bigger and above them. uh I'm not trying to discount sort of what those folks are doing, but it's um there's always something bigger than what's actually there, right?
no, agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
most of these wildcat miners that are in there are poor themselves, landless
Yeah.
people maybe, and trying to
Yeah.
support their families for sure. And to add to that, next level of concerns is that I am afraid of this sort of degradation of the Yanomami youth and their connection to their culture and their
Yeah.
heritage, because the youth are often lured into the gold mines and become gold miners themselves.
Okay.
And you know, ever since money, this concept of money and currency has been introduced to the Yanomami people since the 50s and 60s, and certainly accelerated by the Venezuelan and Brazilian governments by
Hmm.
providing them, these sort of monthly stipends, has created a cult shift in their culture where, the youth kind of want to venture out and they want to, you know, to see the next new shiny thing, which I think is human nature, right? They want to see, and unfortunately, Yanomami that kind of move to the urban settings, a lot of them get involved in drugs and alcohol, prostitution,
Okay.
and then they come back to their territory, and they don't really come back as competent members of their communities. They cause trouble. They become, recalcitrant, and a lot of the times they find they get involved with gold miners. So it's sort of like this outward, violent conflict from the miners, and this sort of internal degradation. And I'm afraid they're getting, attacked from the outside in and from the inside out. And those are the big concerns that I have, is that the Yanomami start losing their connection, the specialness that they have with their rainforest, because I believe that if you really disconnect the ties, your spiritual ties to the rainforest, it makes it easier for people to come in to conquer them and colonize them, and let's say, oh yeah, we would love to develop this land,
Totally.
and we'll give you a paycheck. And I'm afraid at some point the Yanomami person will see more value to them in a small paycheck than the rainforest is for them and for the world. So
Yeah.
those are the concerns that I have.
I think that last one, you're also seeing that in indigenous peoples here in Canada, right? Like
Mm.
it's not uncommon. So yeah, that's really interesting that you say that that would be a really big challenge for sure. Oh man, that's some of the things that are facing your peoples is quite daunting. How's that? I know you have a foundation, and I know I think I read that there's several pillars of your foundation. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Yanomami Foundation?
Yeah. So I recognize that in my community, other than my siblings that grew up here in the U.S., that I was the only member of the community, and not sure if there's many other out there like me that has been socialized, westernized, educated,
Hmm.
in Western society. And I really appreciate the education that I have received, I'm still receiving in Western society, because I believe it's helping me, kind of mobilize the tools and the resources and the support to help confront some of these contemporary challenges.
Yeah.
And so I recognize that you need an economic engine, to be able to provide that. And so the initial infrastructure that I had set up with my co-founders was the Yanomami Foundation, formerly called the Good Project, but didn't want to. I kind of wanted to take my name out of there, so
Yeah.
it's now known as the Yanomami Foundation. And our main, mission is really to equip the Yanomami communities with the tools, a skill set, and projects that help them maintain agency and self determination in their lives. So there are Yanomami leaders that recognize these threats,
Mm.
but they recognize them, but they're like, what can we do? How do we do them? And they know that they need support, they need infrastructure.
Mhm.
And some of the main things we do is we support communities or healthcare clinics with infrastructure, like providing solar panels and batteries. SATCOM systems is a new thing that we're doing, and
Okay.
SATCOM systems allows these sort of, so I call them sentinel communities. They're kind of like at the interface between the two worlds. They
Mhm.
speak Spanish or Portuguese. They still hunt and gather. They're not urbanites, but they sort of serve as like the gatekeepers of the interior.
Okay.
So I call them sentinel communities because they have a very important role in monitoring the land and serving as the voice, to the
Mm.
outside world.
Yeah.
And SATCOMs allows them to monitor and survey, provide surveillance in that area to keep track of who's coming in and out. Also, if there's an outbreak of disease, like COVID-19 or tuberculosis, they can use the SATCOM systems to facilitate that. And
These
and
sentinel
another
communities, David, are sorry, they're comprised of the Yanomami peoples, though?
Yeah, so some
Okay.
examples are like the Bishuasu community in
Okay.
Brazil,
Okay.
in the Marajó region, the Mavaca communities in Venezuela in the Upper Orinoco. So, for example, in order to reach my family, you have to pass through these Mavaca communities, and they're very vigilant. I do appreciate they're very vigilant. They see who's coming in and out, And if they see gold miners attempting, and this has happened, gold miners have attempted to penetrate that region, they will stop them. Yeah, but they need help. They need support.
Yeah.
Um, the other pillar is intercultural training and education.
Mm-hmm.
So these Yanomami communities, they want to learn, they want to learn the ways of the outside world, I guess you can say. They want innovation. They want to learn how to use audiovisual tools like cameras and to help represent their culture and use that as a way of preserving their culture and their languages. They want to learn how to read and write, both in their native tongue and also in Spanish or Portuguese. And so, because they recognize that in order to be to have a voice in the international stage, you need to have the training and education to do that. And that closely dovetails with our microbiome research. They have also been in my experiences, they have expressed a lot of anger over the transgressions of previous scientists for centuries. Anthropologists, sociologists, biologists, immunologists, all the ologists, right? They come down and they've extracted their knowledge, their language, their wisdom.
Yeah.
They have Yanomami have provided blood, sweat, urine,
Mm.
skin,
Yeah.
hair, and now as of late, feces.
Yeah.
So they see this pattern of they just give their knowledge and
Right.
their samples to these outsiders,
Yeah.
and then they leave, and they're
Yeah.
like, we got absolutely nothing in
Yeah.
return.
Yeah.
And the academic community has reaped the bounties of the Yanomami people. They get PhDs, they get salaries, they
Okay.
have they get fame and
Yeah.
and upper mobility. And you know the Yanomami recognize this now, and they said, No more. We This is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Especially since our people are dying of disease, and they're really upset about that, rightly so. And then the second thing is that they want to know, how does this research benefit us in our communities?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the one thing that the Yanomami Foundation is facilitating.
Yeah.
We within the confines that we can operate in, especially within the legal parameters, but facilitating this sort of idea of what we call stewardship. Microbiome stewardship, to ensure that it benefits, if there are any derived benefits that come from research, go back to the Yanomami communities. So that's one of the things that we do. And then lastly, the Yanomami really, they say, you guys just take our stuff and you leave, and we never see you again. And
Yeah.
that's the very
Yeah.
concept of parachute science, or biopiracy, or parasitic science.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, they demanded that you do all your research right here in our community. And of course, we say, well, we need a -80 freezer, we need
Right. Yeah.
centrifuges
Yeah.
and sequencing tools. So,
Yeah.
but that's okay. They understand,
Yeah.
and they said, okay, well, we it's just that we want to learn, we want to see what you do, we want to be
Mm-hmm.
involved. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, of course. And my dream is someday there will be a Yanomami person, boy or girl, that will
Mm-hmm.
get the education and training to be their own PI, to
Mm-hmm.
drive research on their own,
Mm-hmm.
to represent their own communities.
Yeah.
So the Yanomami Foundation wants to facilitate that, where we're trying to build a base camp research station in Brazil, something similar in Venezuela, where we can use it as a community education outreach program. We can show them, hey, do you see this bacteria? This came from
Yeah.
your poop, and you can see it in a microscope, and tell them that this is a big part of why you are who you are,
Yeah.
who you are as a
Yeah.
Yanomami person.
Yeah. I must say, David, the way like your story of, we talked about again your mom leaving at the age of 5, you feeling this real strong resentment towards the Yanomami peoples and the culture and all that because of your mom, that feeling of abandonment. For you to commit so much back to the Yanomami peoples through this foundation, through your research, I hope you feel really proud of yourself because that's amazing. Like it's incredible. Like I don't know how many people would commit, their life and their work um, towards that. Like I think I think it's just incredibly phenomenal and touching. So I just wanted to honor and recognize that because it is, that's what's been going through my mind through this whole episode is just you've been able to reconcile that for yourself and then give back and honor, recognizing that those people have been exploited for so many years, by the academic community, and you're like, I'm gonna not be a part of that problem. I'm gonna be a part of the solution going forward. So, anyways, just wanted to Just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
The microbiome research, and let's just maybe end off on this in terms of what you're noticing. We talked a little bit earlier about the microbiome diversity, and that's a really kind of a key characteristic of the Yanomami peoples. Um, and your focus on diet and such. What are some key takeaways so far that you want people to understand about the Yanomami peoples and their microbiome? And I guess, is there
Hmm.
anything that would be translated to Westerners in any way that they can take away for themselves?
Yeah. So at the beginning stages of, what we're kind of pioneering what we call discovery research, very exploratory,
Yeah.
and it's really cool what we're finding. And the diversity of the Yanomami microbiome is unprecedented. And but it's not just the diversity. It's just sort of think of it as a healthy rainforest. It's a healthy
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem. And in order to keep a healthy ecosystem, you got to take care of it. I think I've seen people take more care of their front lawns than they do of their own, internal ecosystems. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that we need to change about how we treat, our how we acknowledge our microbiome in the context of being members of an ecosystem. And so I think that's really important, right? And what I've learned about, at least, within the Yanomami microbial function and composition, is that they have a high enrichment of microbes that are specializing in breaking down complex carbohydrates. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so what does that mean? Well, I think we all know the term fiber, right? So
Mm-hmm.
fiber, resistant starches. I think our microbes have co-evolved with us to eat a diet that's kind of more enriched, in those types of foods. And of course, um, the what you can eat can range from anywhere from increasing your fruits and vegetables, hey, green plantains,
Mm-hmm.
so think of that. And just, it's tough. Believe me, it's tough. I mean, I like my beer and cheeseburgers, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's tough. But I really, really like to think about food as more of just as just a fuel source, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
big part of our identity, and it's a big part of our connection to the people around us and and our ecosystems around us. So, just planting a seed there. There's no direct, actionable advice I could provide, but definitely think about what you eat and how that, is connected to, your gut microbiome. And believe me, the first couple of weeks of maybe trying to get off of processed foods, because you're addicted, your body is addicted, your microbiome's addicted to those
Yeah.
foods. And it's a tough 2-week transition, but once you get past it, I believe you'll see the light at the end of the tunnel for sure. But yeah, think when you think food, think of the human connection, to your family and friends around you and the surrounding ecosystem. So, and I think as we continue our research with the gut microbiome and the Yanomami, we're gonna start seeing a lot more. And I hope that we can continue protecting the Yanomami, because I have a feeling they have a lot that they can offer us in terms of of their knowledge and wisdoms that have been honed over generations.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm not hearing anything about like, hey, this is a fad diet I want people to kind of take away from. And I know that's pretty consistent with what Emmett said too. She's like, I'm not a fan of those sort of things. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not hearing that from you either. Like, hey, like eat like the Yanomami, like that's going to be beneficial. What maybe just for folks, what do you from a microbiome perspective, why not go down that route?
Eat like a Yanomami, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Might be pretty tough, I think, practically speaking. But the when we study the microbiome, and what reaches the microbes, we think about specific substrates that reach the distal colon and what the
Hmm.
Yanomami microbes eat. And so, we need to celebrate not only the diversity of the microbes within the Yanomami, but we need to celebrate diversity of cultures and food systems throughout the world.
Yeah,
We have
yeah,
our own food systems,
yeah,
and just as China has theirs, Europe, European country has theirs, South
yeah.
America, so there's no one size fits all. So let's just
Hmm.
kind of wash that away, right? And also we have the kind of the privilege to be able to have a diet that's more diverse than that of the Yanomami. We can have any food we want. In fact, we can have it delivered to our
Yeah,
doors.
yeah.
So keep that in mind. And so just from a personal thing, when I think about I think it starts with learning and education. And I think, there needs to be, we have an obligation as scientists to translate our knowledge to the general public. And I think through the foundation, we're doing that. Emma's doing a wonderful work. And I got to say, your work with the podcast plays a role in that. So
Thanks.
appreciate that, really do. And think about, food is more than just a fuel source. It's a connection, right? And the Yanomami do it every day. Food for them is a spiritual connection to the surrounding ecosystem. And I feel like in Western industrialized society, we're like a million miles away from being spiritually connected to our steak. But I think there's some small actions that we can do to try to see food as more of a part of an ecosystem and not as a fuel source.
That's a great. I love that because we aren't connected to our food for the most part, right? Like some people don't even know where some of their cuts of meat come from, right? Or
Yes.
what meat actually is. That it's actually muscle. Like I remember having a conversation with someone and be like, "That chicken breast is actually a muscle." They're like, "What?" Like they just didn't understand that. Like it's
Yeah.
the disconnect that people have with food nowadays is unreal. So yeah, I think that's a really great point. In terms of the Yanomami peoples, I don't know if you've looked at this or studying this, but the rest of their gut in terms of not their colon, but the rest of their digestive system, I guess. Is there
Mm.
anything unique about the rest of their digestive tract compared to Westerners in any way? Do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. Digestive tract starts from the mouth all the way
Yeah,
down to the
yeah,
anus. So we don't
yeah.
we're still, we are looking at their oral microbiome. So we've recently taken swabs, so we'll see,
Okay.
what that's like. Boy, we have so many questions.
Yeah.
What is there? Like for example, there's one of our protective pairs is a mucosal lining, right? That kind of
Right.
separates, the tissue, underlying tissue, and the microbes. So
Yeah.
maybe the Yanomami have a thicker mucosal lining. I don't know.
Mm,
What's difficult about studying the rest of the digestive tract is that we don't have any direct proxy in studying that. So stool is a proxy for studying the distal colon. To
right.
go for any further up would have to be rather invasive, and we'd have to
Right.
take biopsies and so
Yeah.
on. So,
Yeah.
but the future, there's a lot to be done in the future for sure.
Is there anything that in terms of the way they eat that sort of preps their digestive system for food? Like I think there's some thinking that, for example, you see in some cultures they'll start with like pickled foods, or they'll
Hmm.
start with certain kind of foods that might stimulate, the release of like acids in the stomach to kind of get the system ready for food or anything. Are there any kind of practices with the Yanomami peoples from how they eat that you think there's something to take away from?
No, that's a neat thought. Yeah, not that I can think of in terms of stimulating, digestion. So in my family and the surrounding communities, it's taboo to ever eat meat by itself. In fact, they'll never eat meat. So it always has to be, they'll take a bite of meat and they'll take a bite of plantains, and which is really interesting because the plantains is actually feeding the gut microbiome
Hmm.
and creating this sort of kind of priming this ecosystem to be able to healthily and properly digest meat.
Hmm.
So I find that that's an interesting taboo interesting taboo that they have, but interesting practice that they have is that they don't eat just meat. So
Yeah.
maybe something to be said there. Eat a steak, but eat that steak over a bed of vegetables.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you have you ever found anyone in the Yanomami community that doesn't eat meat, or it would have to it's an like they wouldn't be able to survive without it? Like could you essentially be vegan as a Yanomami person?
Yeah, that would be difficult. Yeah, so I've never come across a Yanomami vegan or vegetarian. So, especially since it's a very feast or famine
Mhm.
type of system there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I've never come across a Yanomami that doesn't eat meat. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
good question though. Yeah, yeah, it'd be pretty
Yeah, yeah.
tough. Pretty tough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I wonder what they'd think of, like, if they saw, vegans here, or, if they just thought it was
Well,
madness or
yeah. I mean, if you don't, I could share real quick
Yeah,
that
go for it.
in one of my one of my trips. So one of my favorite times in Yanomami, in my village,
Yep.
is right at the end of the day. Right, the sun is setting. The biting gnats have like gone to sleep. Mosquitoes aren't out in full force, so we're swaying in our hammocks around the fire. It's a really cool time. We're just talking, sharing food, and then I think my mom started remembering some English, and she goes, son, she goes, New Jersey, it's good. She goes, Pennsylvania, it's good. Florida, it's good. She's remembering all the
Yeah,
states that
yeah,
she's traveled.
yeah. Yeah.
So she has my full attention at this moment. And
Yeah.
she goes, I want pizza. I want French fries. I want peaches. I want apples. And I'm just like, Mom, how much English do you know? Because these last few months have been very hard
Yeah, yeah,
communicating
yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
But it was really cute. But she goes, you take me there. And I was shocked. She had asked me to take me to take her back to the United States
Okay.
because I think she wants to try pizza and French fries again for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But she also wants to see my dad and my siblings because they hadn't seen each other for 30 years.
Mm.
So in 2019, with the funding support of Weiss Biosciences and the Yanomami Foundation, we were able to fulfill my mom's wish.
Mm.
We brought her back to the United States, and she reunited with my brother and sister and my dad,
Oh,
first time in 30 years.
yeah.
And it was professionally filmed and produced through Shabano Media, and
Okay.
we're in the middle of producing a documentary titled Wyoming.
Oh,
So
cool.
fingers crossed it gets
Yeah.
released soon. But throughout the time, I eat a lot of salad, and my mom was just dumbfounded. She's like, only rabbits eat grass. Only deer eats grass.
Yeah,
Like you're
yeah.
eating like a deer.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really interesting point that she made. I'm like, yeah, all right, thanks, mom.
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah. So I think just you know, I don't think they eat too many just vegetables or salads.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's a lot of like plantains and game.
Yeah. When she finally got to eat, like, the french fries or whatever she was craving, was she satisfied or was she
Oh
disappointed or
yeah. No, she was satisfied.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
not it's that built-in, human desire for salt and sugar, and
Yeah.
she was very satisfied.
Yeah.
So,
Have you ever like I don't know as a kid if there was something that you ate all the time and then you maybe just stopped eating it and then now as an adult you kind of go back and be like, "Oh, gotta try that again." Have you ever like for me I remember as a kid like those deep McCain deep and delicious cakes. I don't know if you got them in the States, but it was something that was really
uh-huh.
anyways, it was just like this kind of prepared cake that was like maybe $5 and it was probably like I don't know, like maybe 12 inches in size or something and I remember eating those as a kid, and then as an adult, tried it again. It was disgusting. Like I don't know if you've ever gone back with some of those childhood foods and been like, "This, why
Ye
would I even eat this?" But
yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is like these colored sugar drinks, like high C, like
oh
that's
yeah,
like
yeah,
no fruit juice or anything, and we used to
yeah,
guzzle those at like
or like
soccer
Tang
games,
or
and
Kool Aid or something like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
I tried it as an adult. I'm like, this is just pure high fructose corn syrup and,
yep,
and some food coloring, which
yep.
Emma would tell you
Oh
plays a
yeah, she's
role in,
told me. She told me it's
yeah, food
problematic. Yeah,
very problematic for our
yeah,
health. And I just
yeah,
like, I can't believe our generation, like the parents would just let us consume these things like
yeah,
nothing. So
yeah,
that was the one thing, like those high C drinks that we used to drink in the summer at like
yeah,
soccer games and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I mean, nothing against, the parents that do that, but just highly advise that, maybe something a little better, especially since they're playing soccer, like their bodies are active. Let's feed them good
Let's give them
stuff. Yeah.
something really good, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, Emma's definitely talked about tartrazine and its effect
Mm,
on the microbiome, and she's like, "It's just
yeah.
nasty stuff," like,
Yeah.
because I was pushing her, quite a bit as far as, like, from a diet perspective, like, what are the things that you think people should be focusing on, and she really resisted against, like, giving, like, specific advice on that, but then she's like, "The one thing I will say is, like, food color, terrible." So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Agreed. Yeah.
yeah,
And that it kind of brings to mind the Yanomami, they don't have a choice to eat bad food. And there's no
mm,
such thing as junk food. Everything they consume is what we would say good for you. And Yanomami
yeah,
don't have to have that discussion. Oh, this is
yeah,
bad for you, or this is good
yeah,
for you. And to me, I'm like, wow, that is like ultimate food security, right?
yeah,
Where everything you do day in and day out is just part of what your bodies have evolved to. And you know, I don't know the nuances of the forces that are percolating and diffusing into Yanomami territory, capitalism, market
Mm-hmm.
systems, money.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't, it's a force that's hard for me to understand because
Mm-hmm.
it's not like it's just one way. The Yanomami are also kind of being engaged with it. And I just, it's really sad for me to see like a Yanomami person in a village like downing some Dorito chips or Coca-Cola, and it's just the beginning stages of I think is something terrible that's going to happen in the
Yeah.
future, and it's really hard for me to swallow that. But
Yeah.
we just, a good friend of mine, and he says, or actually mentor bioethicist, actually said that maybe it's we can't stop these things from happening, but maybe we can try to stop really bad things from happening and make them less bad. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't have the answers, but we're going to do the best we can, for the
Yeah.
Yanomami.
So I'm assuming then your mom didn't feel compelled to take back any bags of Doritos or anything like that. Did she feel like there was anything she wanted to really take back for the community from when she came back in 2019 or?
Yeah, I wish we could. I would love to sit with a recorder with my mom for like a month and just get all of her insights on this for sure. Because she's a unique Yanomami figure. No one
Okay.
not that I know in that history, she's very well known across the lands, both in Venezuela and Brazil. In fact,
Okay.
some people tell me there's posters of her, and there's slayings that say this is the woman that left the forest and has returned. Right. So the
Oh,
idea of a
yeah.
Yanomami woman that lived in the world of the outside, the world of the Naba, but then just rejected it and came
Yeah.
back to the forest. So
Yeah.
my mom was ready to go back. I don't think there's anything of this world or this culture that she wants in her community.
Yeah.
So I really admire that. So I hope maybe to capture some of her insights, someday for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you still able to keep in touch with her in any way now or no?
No, she's just
No.
so deep, so remote. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just hope she's hanging on. And, I hope that even though I can't call her or email or do anything, I just hope she knows that I'm doing my best up here to
Yeah.
honor her family and our people,
Yeah.
in the ways that I can as a researcher. Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking about those sentinel communities though, like is there a way to um bridge the gap of connection through those sentinel communities? Because you said that you folks like through the foundation, you're trying to put in satcom and things like that. But I guess they're so nomadic too, right? Hey, so it would be
Yeah.
really difficult to kind of get a hold of them.
Yeah, so I think the key connection is partnering with these schools, the
Okay.
intercultural and bilingual schools, that they have the infrastructure there.
Yeah.
Some of them are barely hanging on, but they have the infrastructure. And when we partner with these schools, that can serve, that could empower a lot of these sentinel communities to advance, to achieve their goals in updating their education and advancing their skill set. And the Yanomami have a right to know what's going on out there. I mean, in the world. I mean, they have a
Yeah.
right to know, like when the pandemic was happening. They
Totally.
have a right to know this, right? So,
Yeah.
I think those Sentinel communities, could play a role in helping me keep in touch with the more remote communities, such as my family.
Yeah. Yeah. God, I'm already looking at the time. It's an hour and a half. Sorry, David. I
Oh
just
yeah,
kind of ate up your
yeah,
time there.
no,
Do you want to just finish off with these last two questions I'd ask every guest? Are you okay with that?
sure thing. Yeah, let's go
Yeah,
for it.
honestly, I could talk to you for a whole bunch more time. But okay, five for dinner question: dead or alive? Who are five people you'd want to have dinner with?
Yeah, that's I'm sure everyone has told you it's a tough
Yep,
one, right?
everyone says the same thing. Yep.
But in the my mind was primed, and and every time we do, every time I discuss things, I just get transported back into the jungle, and the majesticness of the Amazon is just really inspiring. And
Mm,
so I really get inspired by previous researchers, and
mm,
explorers
yep.
and that have done work in the Amazon. And not to say that I favor or that I agree with a lot of their ethics
Sure.
and the way they
Yeah.
do things, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, right?
Yeah.
So I really love the story of Percival Fawcett, right?
Okay.
Who has done a lot of work in the Amazonia region, and he, of course, he was looking for the city of El Dorado, right, the city of gold. But
Mm,
through his ambition and his goals, I admire his constitution. But unfortunately, he had a sad end with his son, which I don't tend to follow. But Alexander van Humboldt, naturalist, and
okay.
really played a major role, in understanding the Amazon rainforest under
Mm,
the context of science and whatnot. I love the adventure stories of Teddy Roosevelt.
yep.
Although he kind of fumbled a lot in in one of his expeditions that was very costly to his team and also to the indigenous people. But
Mm.
nevertheless, love his adventures. Candiro Rondon, who's a Brazilian, he was an indigenous person himself, but I've really loved how he was portrayed in John Hemming's book, Die If You Must, but Do Not Kill. So his ambition to, he recognized that, like, in order for these indigenous peoples to survive, they need to be, how do you make contact with them and ensure their survival, and he played a big role in that.
Yeah.
And I've always had a fascination for Jane Goodall's work, with her work. So I would say those are 5 people that,
I don't think you're having
that I,
supper with these folks. I think you're going on some sort of expedition or something that would be way more enjoyable, hey?
yeah, right, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. That's an awesome 5. Okay, last question. Besides the circle of life, what do you know for sure?
Yeah, what do I know for sure? I thought about this one for a while, and I still don't know. That's all I know for sure, is that I don't know. But yeah, so um, what I know for sure um, is is that if I were to, this is sort of an inevitable truth for me, is that always continue your work with hubris, with continue your work with y- like, you don't, I always have this argument, like, I don't want to lose my humanity.
Mhm.
And I always forget that, like, in my cause, there's always this sort of, there's, for every action there's equal opposite reaction. So I feel like
Mhm.
for everything you want to do in your cause, there's always something that pulls you away from your humanity, and that's forgetting the people around you and the people you love, and
Mm.
so on. So one thing I know for sure is that I'll continue doing my work, with the Yanomami, but always constantly reminding myself, don't forget, don't lose yourself in the humanity,
Yeah.
especially at the lab bench, in a laboratory at a university.
That's a great one. Yeah, that's fantastic. And the whole notion of what you started it off by saying, like, uh, what I know for sure is sort of nothing. That is consistent with the number of academics I've had on this podcast. So that's for
Okay,
sure.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just, in the mission, you can get caught up. Sometimes, good people can get caught up in their hubris, and
yeah,
I just want to make sure that that doesn't cloud the mission.
yeah, yeah. David, this has been an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed every single minute of it. The first time I looked at the time was like 55 minutes in. That always tells me that this is, um, yeah, anyways, the conversation, the connections just working. So thank you so much for sharing your story, for being really vulnerable about your childhood experience and your relationship with your mom and relationship with the Yanomami community and peoples. And yeah, just helping people understand and bring light to what's going on there in the Amazon and the threats facing the Yanomami peoples. I hope people check out the Yanomami Foundation website. And I'm imagine there's a way to contribute if people wanted to. Is that right?
Absolutely. And, I feel lucky to be, with a foot in two worlds, to share my experiences as,
Yeah.
as a researcher, but also as a Yanomami. But that was only able to happen through the facilitation of the foundation. So you can support our work at yanomami-foundation.org. Any small donation or contribution would be very, very helpful, and especially in helping us pay for return expeditions to the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah, that's cool. You're welcome back anytime, David. Honestly, I'd love to have follow up as you're kind of progressing in your research. And yeah, I hope to view this documentary that you said is coming out. So that'd be fantastic as well. But yeah, hope you enjoyed your time here as much as I did. And thanks so much again for joining me today.
Thank you for this heartfelt conversation. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. Like, subscribe, do those wonderful things, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.